Nicola, health correspondent in London. Nicola, when I heard this news in the morning, I was very surprised because we all saw that Spain was one of the worst affected countries in Europe, in the world. And yet, look at this, herd immunity hasn't really worked. Tell us more about the research.
Yes, well, look, the figures of people who've been infected in Spain is about 250,000. And as you say, Maria, beginning of the pandemic, it really was the country that the figures were shocking, although it now has, because of its lockdown, because of the other precautions it's taken, it has reduced that. So this study, it's a really major study. It's the biggest study in Europe looking at the numbers of people who have been affected and infected by COVID-19. They tested 34,000 households in Spain, about 61,000 people of all ages, including children. And as you said there, they found out that 5% of the population had been infected. So they had two tests. They had a finger prick test and then they had a more involved blood sample test. And the figures varied depending whether it was a city or whether it was a more rural or coastal area. In Madrid, for example, it was about 10%, a major bustling city. And in these rural areas, fewer than 3%. And children, as expected, because of how much we've been learning about the virus, it was less than 3% of children were infected as well. Now, yes, it seems a surprise, doesn't it? I was speaking to Professor Linda Bold this morning. She's the Professor of Public Health at Edinburgh University. And I was saying to her that, we were thinking that the numbers of people being infected were much higher. And she wasn't surprised by this at all. She said that the public perception that lots of people have been infected with very mild virus, a dose of the virus, is not true. Now, this study showed that about a third of the people were asymptomatic, which is something we've been hearing about more and more. 40% of those who did have symptoms had lost their sense of smell, and more research is coming out about the fact that that often is the first symptom that you know that you've got the virus and you should actually go and get tested. So Professor Bold was saying that this shows that herd immunity is not possible. It's not going to work. There's quite a lot of debate on social media now following this study that was in the Lancet, saying that herd immunity is impossible and unethical. And there was also another study published in this medical journal, The Lancet, based what's been happening in Switzerland. And again, it showed that the numbers of people being infected are not high. In Geneva, an international hub, a busy city, 10% similar to Madrid. So, the idea that eventually enough people will be infected so that you or I are going to be safe is just not possible at the moment.
It's so interesting. I really feel with COVID-19 that we're learning as we're going. So with this research now, Nicola, where does it leave the fight against coronavirus?
It actually leaves it where we have been at the moment, that we need a vaccine and we need effective treatments. Interestingly, this study, of course, was done on people in households. It wasn't done in hospitals. It wasn't done in care homes for the elderly. It was done in just the ordinary households. And it showed that those in larger households were more likely to be infected than in a smaller household where, of course, perhaps you might have a bit more space. So for you and I, it's exactly the same as before. We need to wear our masks, and more evidence is coming out that we need those in enclosed spaces because of potential of aerosol transmission, which we were discussing yesterday. We need to make sure we wash our hands thoroughly. We need to take precautions. We need to keep that physical distance. We need to try and avoid packed enclosed spaces as much as possible. And for the scientists, they need to continue the work that they're doing to find out more about this virus. But the idea of herd immunity just isn't there. It's unethical. The only way we're going to get proper herd immunity is if we find a vaccine or vaccines and we're able to inoculate, they reckon, about at least 70% of the population. That's the only herd immunity we're going to get.
Nicola Hill, always fantastic to speak to you. I learned so much, and I'm sure all the viewers agree with me. Thank you. See you tomorrow.